Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. Okay, look, just get a load of this, like, on screen. This is pretty damn cool, isn't it? Warfronts, to me, capture the feeling of war and the scale of it better than any content in World of Warcraft that we've seen to date. I think they nail the core fantasy that they're going for, especially for the people who are thinking of Warcraft 3, but playing it from the perspective of the heroes. As a system, though, there are problems and concerns that could severely impact their longevity. Now, do bear in mind, this is the first test that's ever been done externally. It was only up for 3 hours, players didn't know what to do, and for most, the lag was horrendous. But I was a part of a lucky group who was in one of the last Warfronts to run in the 3-hour test window. By this stage, the lag was dead, so it's fair to say that I lucked out, and I pretty much got the best Warfront experience that I could have hoped for given the circumstances. Therefore, I think I have a really solid handle on how this system operates. So, what the hell is a Warfront? That's a question that we've been asking since BlizzCon. And, well, let's just get into it. You start off in your airship, the timer counts down, and then you're off to war. You parachute out of your airship and you land in pretty much the early skeleton of your base. So you've got to clear it from enemy troops, and once that's done, you're presented with actually quite a lot to do. And the easiest way to explain this is just to take a look at the map and the buildings. So this is a Horde example, but it's going to be the same for the Alliance. We've got our main sort of town hall style building. The more you upgrade that, the more resources your peons gather passively. More on that later. And then the more troops spawn from your barracks. And I'm pretty sure there is passive troops spawning on top of the troops the players manually recruit with resources. But anyway, let's just talk about barracks. So this is where you order troops. Initially, you've got access to basic grunts and then spear throwers. Ideally, you want to spawn in, like, as an example, 2 waves of grunts and then a set of spear throwers, so that the grunts are a meat shield and the spear throwers do the deeps. Then you can also recruit shamans and wolf riders, however they're unlocked later on by capturing points of the map. After that, we've got the War Mill, so here you hand in resources in order to upgrade your troops' weapons and their damage. Then there is the either Altar of Storms or Circle of Elements, I might be getting confused, but it's where you purchase buffs. And then finally, the Engineer's Workshop, which is where you build Demolishers. So that's kind of your base. Your buildings and your upgrades are done with 2 resources, wood and iron. Wood and iron come from the lumber camp and the mine, so you need to capture both of these points early on in the game. And when you capture the mine, your peons will start to collect iron automatically, but you'll also see minecarts that spawn that just players can pick up, and then players who have the mining profession, they can manually mine the ore. Now, when peons collect iron, they take it to a chest in your base. Then players can pick up their share of that iron so that they can spend it. Now, the lumber works a little bit differently, so when you capture the lumber yard, you can go and pick up an axe, and then this lets you chop down trees, which are strewn across the map. And you can actually really get a lot of wood very quickly with this. Now, wood is mainly used to build buildings and upgrades, and then iron is used for both of those things, plus building troops, which makes iron, I'd say, the more scarce and more important resource. Okay, so it's a fresh game, you have just captured the mine and the lumberyard, you've got your base, what the hell do you do next? Well, you've got to build up your base and your army, so building the barracks is a really good first start, so players should contribute to that, and players should be out gathering resources. But the Alliance are no slouches, so let's take a look at our world map. Now, there are 3 Alliance bases along the main road, and then there's a few other ones strewn across the zone. Now, the little blue dots that you see, they are Alliance NPCs, and the red dots are your friendly Horde ones, in this case. Now, initially, the Alliance NPCs, they will push through the Horde ones pretty easily, so players have to get involved in the frontline warfare to hold the line. You'll want to capture the first base for sure pretty quickly, but if you look at the map, there's also these large blue icons. Well, these are specific Alliance attack waves. So while there are regular creep waves that come in constantly, the Alliance will send powerful contingents of troops at you. This usually means elites and sometimes siege engines. Now, these are enough to kill 1 or 2 players on their own, and in the early game, they can actually take bases off you. They are sort of threatening, and they also spawn unpredictably, so you need to keep an eye on what's going on with them and actually react to the game, and it will play out differently in different rounds. But soon enough, your miners and your lumberjacks, they've built the barracks, they're upgrading your troops, and this allows This sort of takes some of the combat load off players because you've got more grunts coming in. But it's still the early game, so you still need to actively fight off the Alliance NPCs. But after this, it's a good idea to capture the Elemental Ring place, which lets you recruit shamans from your barracks. These are great because the shamans can heal, which gives your waves of troops more sustain. So by this stage, you've probably got level 2 armor for your troops. You've got access to maybe everything bar Wolf Riders. I'm not sure how good the Wolf Riders are, but the farm that unlocks them is a simple push down from the lumberyard, so it's worth getting that. Generally what you do for those is you wait for a wave of friendly creeps, and then you go along with that wave of creeps to take a base. Now, while all of this is happening, you've still got to fight back enemy attack waves, and you've got to react to events. As an example, big elemental rare can spawn in, and if you defeat that rare, it will push a lane for you. Now, as time goes on, I think the Alliance sends more and more attack waves at you, and they also upgrade their troops more and more, so you've got to keep on top of your own upgrades. And then the last thing to do, right, once you've got your army built up and all that, is to get 3 Demolishers. Once that's done, it's time to push up the middle lane and properly go to war. So, there's a capture point just at the top of the hill, and then there's one outside the gates of the city. So, what you want to do is pretty much just push up there, and this is where the scale just gets so impressive. You've got hundreds of NPCs active, and it just feels like the climactic part of a Warcraft 3 game, but you are the perspective of one of the heroes. And it's interesting because that's kind of going back to the early prototypes of World of Warcraft, which they literally just were a third-person camera on Arthas in Warcraft 3. Now, each time you want to capture one of these points, you need to kill the boss NPC who's defending it, along with all of their cohorts, and then that opens up capturing the flag. So, once you've done all this stuff, it's time to just wait for the gates to fall. Your Demolishers will do this over time, and while that's happening, your creeps will just throw themselves at the city wall and get destroyed, which is a little bit odd. But after the gate falls, then you rush in and you kill the boss. In our case, it was Muradin. And that's a Warfront. The one last thing, I suppose, is that each time you play, you get a different enemy. So the first time I was dealing with humans, the second time I was dealing with dwarves, they had different abilities and stuff. Both matches, Leodrin was my hero NPC, but it can also be Etrig. Now the enemy sub-factions feel different to fight, and broadly the enemy AI is quite good. So reacting to the enemy pushes felt really important in the early game. Enemy creep waves can actually kill players, and their AI worked quite nicely. So mages would poly you, hunters would run away to get range on you, healers would heal their, friendly NPCs. So there very much is a right way to go about fighting these waves of NPCs. And it's more interesting than normal combat because the NPCs feel like they're working together, which is really, really good. Now, so far, I think what's came across in this video is that I love the fantasy of Warfronts. Visually, they nail it, and a lot of the mechanics are definitely there, and in the first run, overall, it was super fun, but I think there's issues, and we have to cover them. First, a few testing notes, though. I've seen loads of people claim these take 1 to 2 hours. That may have been the case in the test, but not on live. Many of us had lag so bad that our DPS output was probably 10% of normal. Also, most teams were quickly reduced to half size quite quickly because people left. Plus, no one knew what they were doing for the first part. So, on live, I see these taking 25 to 35 minutes, especially once people know what they're doing, assuming the difficulty level is the same as what we had here. So if someone is trying to tell you that these are going to take 1.5 to 2 hours, it may have been their experience in the test. I highly doubt that will be the case on live. And now that we've sort of qualified this, let's talk about the problems, starting with difficulty. Losing one of these is extremely hard. You can lose, though. It happens when your hero NPC dies, but it's super unlikely. Everyone would just have to be completely brain dead for that to happen. Broadly, everything, it's just a bit too easy, and I think this is because it's done for a random queue. Blizzard may feel like they cannot balance this system around players making good use of the systems contained within Warfronts, which when you think about it, that's equal parts funny and equal parts sad. When I say more difficulty is good, what I more mean is higher quantities of NPCs for the enemy and AI that's more aggressive. Perhaps a bit more health and damage, but mainly the difficulty should be such that you need to spread your team out and delegate different players to different tasks and actually do strategy. You can get by just by being very willy-nilly at the minute. I mean, we won with a team of 10, so a full stack of 20, unhindered by lag, they would crush this. Now, if the Alliance Assault Waves were, say, 3 times more difficult because they had more NPCs and the NPCs were stronger, such that a team of 6 players was required, then that could get really interesting. Essentially, my point here is that the mechanics overall with Warfronts are awesome. They are designed to be unpredictable, things you have to react to, but in practice, they're not hard enough, which means that while on paper it might be different every time, the ways in which it feels different, they may not be noticeable enough because of the low difficulty, which will lead to a piece of content that should feel replayable, not really feeling replayable. And that's the core of it. I love the design on paper. I really enjoyed my first proper run through it. The fantasy of being in a big war is totally there. It's awesome, it's epic, it just needs to be harder. I would love a pre-made queue version of this content that was aimed at gilded players, perhaps with better rewards. Maybe that's where the tier 3 Warfront armor that looks so cool could come from. I suppose now they've mentioned it, there are 3 tiers of Warfront armor. I wonder if that's just you grind through them, or if, you know, there's higher difficulty modes. Overall, I suppose we need to think about the place of this content broadly and how long it's meant to last for. This design could work under certain circumstances, though, and even though there, I think, would be a bit of lost potential. So right, if every major and minor patch brings a new Warfront, which seems to be the case because there's a data mined Barracks one, then this content would only have to last for 3 months. Now, since the Warfronts change hands weekly, you'll probably have like 8 windows of opportunity to do Warfronts. Now, if these Warfronts are constructed in such a way that Blizzard's development workflow means that it's easy to port these systems to another map, such that it's basically cheap to make more of them, then these could work as something that you do a few times per Warfront just to see the war and get some rewards. Then every patch, the war progresses to a new Warfront, and in doing so, we just get a really cool way to experience the war through gameplay, something that's not massive, but it's a really nice part of the game. And I suppose you'd be experiencing the war both in terms of the instance content and the uninstance stuff, and you know, the sort of associated world content. But overall, I love what they're going for. I'm impressed with their technical execution and what they've built to make this. I'm just worried about the longevity because of the difficulty levels, making just the teamwork not really matter much. It does show me, though, something really exciting. Fundamentally, these creep waves going at each other, these capture point bases, this harkens back to something I have been pushing this game to have since early Warlords of Draenor. I remember making a video in Warlords of Draenor, how the whole battle for Shattrath City could be awesome if it was basically like, imagine an uninstanced Warfront without some of the base building. So you've got all of your different capture points and bases on the map, they all have associated content and things, and you just have creep waves, you know, going between sort of a tug of war thing between the Alliance and the Horde, or between, you know, friendly faction and enemy faction, doesn't matter, it could be old god forces or something. But it's just the idea that you have a dynamic zone where even if a player is not there are NPCs that are battling it out. That means that it feels more alive. It feels like there's an actual war going on in the uninstanced world of Warcraft. Because man, WoW's world content is so boring, right? World of Warcraft in 2018 has less interesting content than Guild Wars 2 in 2012, and that is absurd to me. Well, if, let's just say, okay, let's just use Argus, right? Let's just say there's one of the Corcoon or something. Imagine if it was set up so that you had a section of bases just like in a Warfront. You've got Legion NPCs coming from the Legion stronghold. You've got Lightforged NPCs coming from the Vindicar, and players can, you know, tilt the balance, right, and like push and pull in either direction. And as you do that, you're opening up new quests and content and stuff, and basically it feels like one big dynamic zone. To me, the Warfront tech, if it can be applied to the rest of just other elements of World of Warcraft, I think it could make for something really cool. Of course, that's a personal opinion, and obviously it's one that I have, you know, a bit of a feeling for, right? So definitely that's coming from partially logical and also partially an emotional perspective, so take that with what you will. But anyway, that's my video on Warfronts. Overall, yeah, lots of potential. Blizzard, please just, you know, give this the difficulty that it deserves, because you've made something that's really cool, and I would be sad if it was squandered. So that's it for this video. A humongous thank you to everyone who watched it, and a double humongous thank you to everyone over on Patreon. Over there are vlogs, behind the scenes, early access to non-news content, and a bunch of other stuff. We've got some cool plans in the works, so you can check out the Patreon if you want to help out with